everyone, my name is Elaine, and today I'm going to be summarizing the third installment of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives, Oathbringer, so that you'll be ready to take on the fourth installment in the series, Rhythm of War, which is due to come out in a few weeks on the 17th of November. This is going to be a thorough summary. I want it to feel like you just read Oathbringer minus all the unnecessary, slow, and generally boring bits. You're welcome. Now let's jump into it, starting with the prologue. This is a flashback which takes place 6 years ago. Eshaniah consigns Gavilar to death for wanting to bring back the old gods at the celebration of a peace treaty between the Alethi and Parshendi. This is similar to the other books in the series because we always begin with a flashback of the scene from one of the characters' perspectives. Part 1. United. Chapter 1. Dalinar has a vision of Kholinar having been destroyed by an unknown force. As the vision shatters, he sees the Unmade, a figure with 9 shadows and red eyes, the champion of Odium, the force behind the desolations. The eyes haunt him, and the vision spurs him to try and unite the kingdoms at a faster rate. A messenger arrives to tell him that Sadeas has been killed. Chapter 2. Sadeas' corpse is discovered by Bridge 4 and some of Sadeas' men. Dalinar does his best to diffuse the conflict that arises between them. Then he meets with one of his senior scribes, Kalami, his sons, Shallan, Navani, and some of the other high princes and their families who are with him in Urithiru. None of the others are sad to see Sadeas dead. But Dalinar is saddened. He recognizes how Sadeas' mind could have been of use in the impending war, reminisces over their friendship, and fears for his reputation. Kalami explains that the desolations were destruction made manifest, each one being so profoundly devastating that humankind was left broken, populations ruined, society crippled, scholars dead. Humankind was forced to spend generations rebuilding after each one. That's on page 41. And that the Voidbringer's goal was to wipe humankind from Roshar, also on page 41. When she is done, Dalinar proclaims his desire to unite Roshar in order to keep history from repeating itself. He assigns tasks to his family and followers to help them get Urithiru in order. A flashback from Dalinar's perspective, it takes place 34 years ago. After a battle, he recruits an archer who tried to assassinate him during the skirmish in exchange for not looting the man's town. The archer has amazingly accurate aim at 300 to 400 yards. Chapter 4. Present day. Dalinar suggests that Espren marry him to Navani so that they can be together in the proper way. He tells her that he can't remember anything about his dead wife, including her name. Later, the Stormfather weds Navani and Dalinar during the night. Gadash, Dalinar's Ardent, informs him that the Ardensha will not be pleased, on page 63. Chapter 5. An excerpt from Oathbringer informs us that Shadesmar is the realm of the Spren. That's on page 66. Kaladin tries to beat the Everstorm to his home, Hearthstone, but is too late. The town has been largely destroyed. While searching the City Lord's manor, he finds a guard and wonders if he's a survivor or part of an expedition to investigate what happened. Chapter 6. Kaladin and the guardsmen go farther into Roshoni's manor, and Kaladin sees a lot of familiar faces. He finds his parents. They are shocked to see him because they were told he was dead. He tells them Tien died in person. They already knew from his letter. His mother tells him that their house is intact and wants him to stay. But Roshoni and the captain of his guard have a problem with Kaladin's slave brands. Kaladin punches Roshoni in the face for Moash. Chapter 7. Kaladin does his best to defuse the situation and demands Roshoni, his parents, and the guards that came following the commotion, the demand for a seizure, follow him to a quiet place. Only the guards and Roshoni do so when he shows off his new shardblade and his eyes lighten. During their meeting, Kaladin discovers the Parchment turned into Voidbringers during the storm, but didn't attack Hearthstone. He tells Roshoni the desolation has returned and leaves Roshoni in charge of his home's protection and upkeep. He updates Dalinar of his findings via Spanreed. Kaladin tells Dalinar that he intends on doing some scouting to find out why the Voidbringers left Hearthstone unscathed, etc. Later, he finds out that his mother had a baby boy and that his father refuses to leave for a safer location like Kaladin hopes. They argue. A crowd overhears and he is forced to confirm that the Voidbringers have returned and that the Knights Radiant have been founded and will not fail to protect them. That's on page 90. He sets off to hunt Voidbringers. Chapter 8. Shallan lies to Pattern, claims that she's alright with his part in killing her mother. Then she's taken by a scout to meet with Dalinar and his family. Dalinar is frustrated. How can he unite Roshar when he doesn't even know all of his people? Shallan creates an illusory map out of Stormlight, which spans the meeting room. Dalinar decides to protect the cities with oath gates. A scout arrives to inform Dalinar that another murder has occurred. Chapter 9. The dead man is a Lightite officer named Vedekar Perel. He's a member of Sabariel's army. Navani inspects the body and states that Vedekar was killed by the same person who murdered Sadeas. Dalinar places Adolin in charge of investigating the murders. Chapter 10. Kaladin continues his quest, but can't find any towns or villages where the Parchment attacked. He and Syl discuss motherhood. Since she was partially shaped by the Stormfather, she believes she could do the same to other Spren and become a mother. After trading for glowing spheres in Horn Hollow, A light-eyed man takes Kaladin to the location where the rogue Parchment assaulted us. That's on page 109. Kaladin finds out that the Parchment raided the grain storage outside town from a young Ardent. They only left 4 sacks of grain before departing. He leaves her and still strikes up a conversation about intimate relations with him since the Ardent seemed to like him. She suggests he pursue Shallan because people in relationships are happier. That's on page 111. He cuts their conversation short. He arrives at the city lord's house where a trapper tells him that the Parchment are headed toward Kholinar. Kaladin announces that he will be going there too. Renarin asks his brother to give the shard blade he won for him to someone else. Renarin and his friend created a radiant blade he finds more comfortable. Then Renarin heals Adelin's injured wrist, 33 years ago. Dalinar just won his shard plate in combat. He uses it in a siege on the rift with Sadeas, Gavilar, and his army. He isn't very skilled with its use yet. During the siege, Dalinar and his elites spring a trap Tanalan set in a desperate attempt to deal with the enemy shardbearers. That's on page 122. Tanalan crushes a section of his city to do so, and it only kills some of Dalinar's elites. Dalinar seeks vengeance and goes after Tanalan. He is rescued by Taleb, the archer he spared, when the marksman downs 2 enemy soldiers who tried to cut the supports on a walkway Dalinar was using. Tanalan duels Dalinar and is grievously wounded when Dalinar collapses the platform they were fighting on. Tanalan is dragged away by 2 of his men, and Dalinar gives chase. Dalinar kills Tanalan and his young son to claim Oathbringer, the sword that belonged to Sadeas, the Sunmaker, the last man to unite Elithkar. That's on 128. Chapter 12, we're back in the present. Dalinar invites the King of Azir to Ur-Thru via Spanreed. The king doesn't respond to the invitation, but agrees to offers of aid through the sharing of information. Dalinar discovers that the Azish king is negotiating contracts with the Voidbringers to avoid further conflict. Dalinar then asks to come through the Oathgate to speak directly to the Emperor and make sure they get the portal working again. The Azish lie and say it was destroyed and there can be no travel through it. When Dalinar says they must unify and not negotiate with the enemy, the Azish backtrack and say no negotiations are happening and cut the conversation. Dalinar is displeased. Next, he speaks to Queen Fen of Thalena. Dalinar issues the same invitation to her as the Emperor and finds out that the Parchment in her city transformed in the storm, and some minor skirmishes broke out before they stole most of the city's ships and sailed away. Fen declines the invitation in favor of rebuilding her homeland. Dalinar asks her to search out budding knights radiant in her land and offers to help train them. When the conversation ends, he senses it didn't go well. He meets with more people via Spanreed. It doesn't go well. Dalinar knows he must meet with more world leaders and bring them over to his cause. Elhokar swears fealty to Dalinar, initiating his rise to High King. They still have to fill out some paperwork. Then Elhokar begins to plan his return to reclaim their home, Kholinar. Finally, Taravangian, king of Yag-Kaved and Kharbranth, contacts Dalinar via Spanreed. A radiant in his kingdom has come forward to open the Oathgate, and he wants to meet and ally himself with Dalinar. Dalinar is overjoyed. Chapter 13. Shallan practices being Veil in her room. She's interrupted by Adolin. They eat dinner together after she formally introduces him to Pattern and names Pattern their chaperone. Pattern breaks up their kiss, and the couple promises one another that they won't mess their relationship up. Chapter 14. Kaladin spies on a Voidbringer camp. He watches them play cards and eat the grain they stole, now swollen with rain. When he is spotted, he surrenders although he could take their warriors easily. Chapter 15. Shallan and Adolin discuss the reports of the murders. She thinks the killer is the same. He doesn't. Adolin decides to teach Shallan how to use her blade. As he fetches some gars for the blades, she creates a new, stronger persona that can handle the pain of holding her new blade. Radiant. When Adolin returns, they begin training. Chapter 16. Dalinar inspects Kaladin's shardblade. It lacks a gemstone, which are what allows men to bond to shardblades. That's on page 166. During a discussion with the Stormfather, Dalinar finds out that the knights abandoned everything they'd sworn, and in so doing killed their spren. Other blades are the corpses of those spren, which is why they scream at your touch. That's on 167. They also discuss the best way to defeat Odium, a battle of champions. When they're done speaking, Dalinar hides the blade in one of the unused towers. He goes to train and admits he doubts the Almighty in a duel with Kadash. As he duels, he speaks with the Queen of Iri via Spanreed. He discovers that she wants to avoid war and negotiate with the Voidbringers. Kadash begs Dalinar to recant his insistence that the Almighty is dead, so that he can make the Ardentia accept his marriage to Navani. That's on 178. Dalinar won't because falsehoods serve nobody. Also on 178. Dalinar wins the duel by lashing Kadash to the ground. The Queen will only consider Dalinar's request for unity if he returns the stolen goods, the shardplate he received from his first marriage. The conversation with the Queen ends. When Navani speaks his deceased wife's name, Dalinar can hear it. Evie. He can remember her face, and his memories come flooding back. Chapter 17. Kaladin realizes how human the Parchment are. They have human fears and children. They're former slaves like him. He tries to relate to the man holding his bindings, but the Parchment doesn't take kindly to it. Kaladin tries to point out ways they can improve their lives and remain safer, but his words fall on deaf ears. Syl confirms that the Parchment are being led by a Void Spren. Kaladin has Syl turn into a knife so that he can cut his bindings and escape. Once he has done so, he takes charge of the Parchment. He plans out what they need to do to survive. He makes fire with wet wood for them. He doesn't seem to want them to get caught. Chapter 18. Shallan practices being Veil again. She begs Pattern not to die or leave her on her way to the bars of the breakaway, which she has decided to investigate for information about unexplained murders that had been glossed over or forgotten. She gets drunk and strikes up a conversation with a bouncer named Jor. He tells her that the murders happen in All's Alley. She heals her drunkenness with Stormlight and goes off to investigate. She talks to Pattern on the way to the alley. She says she needs to deepen her lies. They can't be surface level anymore. At the alley, she finds out about a double murder Ned, an angry drunk from Sadius' camp, committed. His wife and one of the alley's barmaids. One of the bouncers, said Ned screamed that he didn't kill the second one the entire time they were dragging him to his fall. That's on page 205. The bouncers dropped him off the plateau, if you were wondering. But the body was strangled the exact same way as Rem, Ned's wife. Body dropped in the same position. That's on 205. Shallan wonders what it means. Another flashback from Dalinar's perspective. This one takes place 31 years ago. Dalinar's at a feast. Gavilar is talking to Brightlard Toe. Dalinar is bored and in need of a knife for his pork. He goes out in a high storm to retrieve it. When he returns, Gavilar comments on how he may have convinced Toe that they're strong enough to protect him from his enemies. The Colin brothers discuss why Sunmaker's empire collapsed with Navani, Sadius, and his wife, Ela, ambition. After Dalinar dispatches an assassin that tried to kill Gavilar, Dalinar agrees to marry Toe's sister, Evie, since he can't have Navani. This secures his shard plate. Chapter 20. Kaladin continues to help the Parchment by teaching them about injuries, etc. Saw, the Parchment who had originally been his captor, resents Kaladin. He doesn't like feeling like a child and being taught things that he should already know, now that he's escaped. That's on page 217. They argue about whether or not their respective peoples have to go to war. After Saul leaves, angered by Kaladin's suggestion that the Parchment shouldn't be re-enslaved because they're like regular people now, Kaladin admits to Syl that he agrees with Saw's sentiment. It will come to war. And although he's starting to want to defend the Parchment and teach them to fight, he doesn't dare. The only way he can fight the Voidbringer is to pretend there's a difference between the ones he has to protect and the ones he has to kill. That's on 219. 21. Adolin invites Shallan to a meeting with Ela Sadius to see if she has any clues about her husband's murder. Shallan agrees to attend. Before they meet Ela, they see Pelona and Sabariel. He admits that he wants to return to the war camps to reclaim his lands before someone else takes them. He also plans to tax the Oath Gates to raise money. Adolin and Shallan arrive at the meeting with Ela and find Mraize, one of the leaders of the Ghostbloods, standing beside her. Chapter 22. Mraize and Shallan are sent away to complete various errands. Shallan discovers that he is keeping an eye on Ela. Mraize promises to deliver Shallan's brothers to her and mentions that he has a task for her. She refuses to do it, although she acknowledges her debt. One soulcaster, lost, destroyed. That's on page 232. In order to have her debt forgiven, he asks her to secure Urthero in exchange for information. A whispered word. Hellerin suggests that it's about Shallan's eldest brother, who had died in Elithkar. Ela thinks someone from the Colin camp murdered her husband. She wants Adolin to share what he finds out with Maritas Amaram, who is leading her own investigation. He is being tended to by Sadius' people and has not made his presence known. Ela's actions in protecting Amaram suggest that she views Dalinar as a liar. Shallan believes she's reinforcing her side as an alternative to Dalinar's rule. That's on page 233. Politics are complicated. Shallan admits to Adolin that she thinks there are multiple killers because of her own investigation. They find out that the High Storms have returned. Chapter 23. Kaladin rents a bunker for the Parchment to wait out the High Storm in. Kaladin meets the Yellow Spread. She asks what he's still doing with the Parchment and if he'll fight for them. He wonders if he'll be allowed, and is told that he will find out at their destination. She also wonders how he knew of the coming storm. Kaladin lies and says he could feel it coming. Chapter 24. Dalinar wonders why he's beginning to remember Evie. Why only the early memories are coming back to him. Taravangian arrives in Urthuru along with some of his people and the newest Knight Radiant, Mulata of Yakaved. Dalinar and his men give Taravangian and his retinue a tour. Dalinar and Navani admit that Taravangian and his people are the only ones who have heeded their warning call. The Tukari won't ally themselves with Dalinar. They claim that none are radiant but their ruler and demand that Dalinar renounce his claims. Dalinar realizes Taravangian only sided with him because he feared that Dalinar would march on his lands if he did not. It was a suspicion that had tainted every conversation with the other monarchs. That's on 249. Knowing this, Dalinar wonders what he must do now to unite everyone and save the land. How far he is willing to go. 25. Shallan goes exploring in the bowels of Urthuru and finds a theater. She creates an intricate illusion for Pattern and recounts the story of the girl who looked up. After the illusion dissolves, she realizes that one of her audience members is real and chases after them. She discovers a strange spread and tries to follow it further into the breakaway. There, while disguised as Vale, Shallan discovers that Rock was injured. He appears to have been stabbed right through the center of his hand. Rock says it was by someone wearing a hat and coat, like Vale. Ishna, one of the bouncers, or thugs if you'd prefer to look at them that way, from All's Alley, asks if she can join the Ghostbloods. Shallan denies her. 29 years ago. a flashback from Dalinar's perspective. Dalinar defeats Khalanar, bringing the final battle and the conquest of Alucard to a close. He wins a shard blade and plate, which he gives to his brother. He's ashamed of his desire to kill him during a momentary rage, so that he could claim everything Gavilar had. Everything he wanted, Navani and his throne. Afterward, he swears to make way for Gavilar in all things. He must never be king. That's on page 272. Chapter 27. Urithiru's powers meet. Shallan discovers that the spren she saw is an ancient one of Odium. The Eyrie have joined the enemy. Entire cities have gone dark. Strange considering the number of spanreeds they should possess. The conversationalists realize that the enemy seems able to locate spanreeds somehow. That's on page 275. Dalinar realizes that the Parchment must be after the Oath Gates. As she sketches figures during the meeting, Shallan realizes that the murdered people and injured Horn-Eaters look similar to one another. She surmises that the spren is mimicking the violence, killing or wounding in the same way as attacks from previous days. That's on 276. Shallan meets Malada. She doesn't like the woman, who seems to doubt the Alethi's claim that the desolation has returned. Shallan decides to show Adolin and Dalinar her findings later, and then try to find the weird spren again. Elaine Sadius names Amaram regent and heir to the house title. King Elhokar acknowledges their act. Adolin and Shallan leave the meeting. She admits that she believes Amaram killed her brother. Adolin explains that Amaram got his blade from Kaladin. The bridge boy insisted that he'd saved Amaram's life by killing a shard bearer. Amaram then killed Kaladin's squad and took the shards for himself. That's basically the entire reason the two hate each other. That's on 280. Shallan flips through her sketchbook and finds a bunch of drawings she doesn't remember making. Pattern can't remember either. Even though she's scared, she decides that she can't abandon Urithiru's secrets. She must uncover them. She visits Vatha and his men and tells them she has dangerous work for them that may involve them getting drunk. Chapter 28. Dalinar discovers that the Azir intend to seal off their Oath Gate until it can be destroyed. Queen Fen continues to refuse Dalinar's aid. She doesn't want an Alethi army coming into her city. She fears it would fall. The men in Bridge 4 find Oathbringer hidden amongst some planter boxes near the place where Sadius was killed. The sword whimpers in Dalinar's hands. The Stormfather tells him it hates him. Dalinar asks if he can save the spren who forged the blade, but the Stormfather doesn't know how. Dalinar gives the sword to Elaine. Dalinar discovers that the Stormfather can show his visions to other people. This solves one of Dalinar's problems. He now has a way to meet with the other monarchs in person. He intends to start with Queen Fen. Chapter 29. Vale and her men hunt for the killer spren. After it imitates a hanging that took place recently, Vale, Glurv, and Vatha trail it. The two men can't keep up. Shallan follows the spren to a pit from one of her strange drawings and sends Pattern away to find Adolin and some soldiers. They descend into the pit and discover some old murals in a library with decomposed books. Afterwards, they encounter one of the Unmade, the Midnight Mother. A fight ensues. Shallan realizes that she knows the spren and what it's up to. She conjures a series of illusions made of light to fight the Unmade shadowy creations. Together, she, Renarin, Adolin, and the members of Bridge 4, minus Kaladin, begin to drive the Midnight Mother back. Then, Shallan presses her bare safe hand against it. Chapter 30. Shallan and the Midnight Mother come to know each other intimately. Shallan realizes the spren fears her because it had once been trapped by another Lightweaver. The spren flees, and Shallan orders everyone to let it go. Its absence reveals the presence of a pillar covered in thousands of cut gemstones. Guards will be posted to protect the treasure. Chapter 31. Kaladin and the Parchment arrive at Revelar, where Saw hopes to start a new life. He and Kaladin speak about how he feels the humans should be punished for enslaving his people, and if the impending fight will simply be humans versus Parchment, or if it can be more, oppressors versus the oppressed. Revelar has been overwhelmed by Parchment. The humans have been locked in pens and kept under guard, in old Parchment quarters or army barracks. Although Ken vouches for him, Kaladin decides he has learned enough and steals Ken's spheres to make his escape during the coming high storm. He says he doesn't want to be their enemy. The Parchment still feel betrayed as they watch Kaladin fly away. While in the air, he discusses what is right and wrong with Syl. What? Syl asked. I can't help but feel a kinship to them, Syl. They conquered the city. They're Voidbringers. No, they're people, and they're angry, with good reason. I know that feeling. It burns in you, warms inside your brain until you forget everything but the injustice done to you. That's how I felt about Elhokar. Sometimes a world of rational explanations can become meaningless in the face of all that all-consuming desire to get what you deserve. You changed your mind about Elhokar, Kaladin. You saw what was right. Did I? Did I find what was right? Or did I just finally agree to see things the way you wanted? Killing Elhokar was wrong. And the Parchment on the Shattered Plains that I killed, murdering them wasn't wrong? You were protecting Dalinar, who was assaulting their homeland, because they killed his brother. Which, for all we know, they did because they saw how Gavilar and his people treated the Parchment. So what's the difference, Syl? What is the difference between Dalinar attacking the Parchment and these Parchment conquering that city? I don't know, she said softly. And why was it worse for me to let Elhokar be killed for his injustices than it was for me to actively kill Parchment on the Shattered Plains? One is wrong. I mean, it just feels wrong. Both do, I guess. Except one nearly broke the bond, while the other didn't. The bond isn't about what's right and wrong, is it still? It's about what you see as right and wrong. What we see. Sanderson, pages 317 to 318. Kaladin openly questions his morality and seems to continue to struggle with figuring out what side he is really on. As he continues flying, Kaladin notices the humans in their pens, unprotected. He flies to their aid and is attacked by some of the fused Parchment. He draws them into the storm and loses them, then calls on the Stormfather to turn aside so he won't harm the exposed humans below. The Stormfather denies him and Kaladin returns to the ground to try and save those who haven't yet found shelter from the storm. He deflects part of the storm with his powers, creating a pocket of calm and rescues some people. Kaladin rides the storm back to Ur-Thuru. Chapter 32. Shallan recovers from her ordeal in Sabarial's sitting room. She tells Polona of her experience. The Midnight Mother is desperate to understand humankind, and wonders if this friend was once human. Yasna steps into the room. Interludes. Puli, the lighthouse keeper, wonders if the time his grandfather had warned of has come, if they'll arrive to destroy their surroundings. Alista, an ardent Edjakasha, searches for a quiet place to read. She finds one in the forest and reads about Wima's thoughts on Bright Lord Sterling. She's interrupted by Ardent Irv, who wants to check her progress on the dawn chant for Navani. Alista shares her notes and explains that everyone once wrote the same language, but its use declined and it was forgotten. Ardent Irv offers to lend Alista the sequel to the book she had been reading in exchange for her help translating a dawn chant section. Venli, Demid, her once mate, and some of Venli's friends search the chasms for her sister. They find Eshonai, dead. Ulam, the spren who leads them, disrespects the deceased and Venli fights with him. He calls her people traitors since Eshonai and the others sent that assassin to kill the human king specifically to keep us from returning. That's on page 340. The Parchment discover that their ancestors are really the ones in charge and strip Eshonai's body of her shard blade and plate, as Ulam instructed. They abandon the corpse. Part 2. New Beginnings Sing. Chapter 33. Shallan reunites with Yasna. She's lectured on the making of fabrials, which involves capturing a spren and imprisoning it inside a gemstone crafted for the purpose. That's on 347. Yasna admits that she's an El Scholar, which is what allowed her to survive her attack. She explains that all Radiants have an attachment to Shadesmar. Our spren originate there, and our bond ties us to them. But my order has special control over moving between realms. I was able to shift to Shadesmar to escape. That's on 348. They decide that they need to talk more. Shallan dreads telling her about the Ghostbloods, which attacked Yasna. Chapter 34. Dalinar and the Stormfather draw Queen Fen into the vision with the Knights Radiant, falling from the sky, come to deliver a small village from a strange and monstrous force, on page 350. When they finally speak, she admits that she thought Dalinar had lost his mind. Dalinar realizes Fen thought he'd been in contact with the enemy. Dalinar wants to show her more, asks the Stormfather if he can invite more than one person into a vision at a time, have a few going at once. The Stormfather does not appreciate being ordered about. When the vision ends, Dalinar believes that Fen will come to Ur-Thuru because she no longer believes he's mad. And although she wonders if he is siding with the Voidbringers, he knows how to speak to her now, with passion, as himself. Chapter 35. Sigzil meets with Kaladin. He's acting as Kaladin's clerk. Sigzil says the other men are directionless and asks what a Knight Radiant is. Kaladin says they'll have to figure it out. He also permits Sig to act as the bridge's Ardent. Sig suggests that they try recruiting new members. Kaladin agrees. Kaladin seems pained by the thought of dissolving the bridge crew if they all become Radiants. Lyn arrives and says Kaladin's request has been fulfilled. He tries to recruit her to the Windrunners, but she declines. She doesn't want to be a scribe. She elects to wait for tryouts. After she leaves, Sig admits he failed the test for government training in Nazir, and is glad he did. Kaladin begins checking out the Royal Emerald Reserve from the Quartermaster, so Bridge 4 can practice being Radiants. A flashback from Dalinar's perspective takes place 24 years ago. Evie is pregnant. She comments on how Dalinar only seems to live when he's fighting. Dalinar contemplates the nature of spren. Are flame spren made of fire? Anger spren of anger? Evie isn't interested in his thoughts. She isn't scholarly like Navani, nor truly inquisitive. And Gavilar isn't interested in what Navani has to say when she speaks of things that interest her, similar to how Evie isn't interested in Dalinar's strange thoughts. Dalinar asks Evie if men can truly change. Evie thinks they can. Gavilar arrives to inform Dalinar and Evie that Rathalas is demanding Dalinar's Shardblade. They claim that Tanalan's heir has returned and deserves the shard because Dalinar never won it in a true contest. That's on 374. Dalinar admits he didn't kill the boy. Gavilar says he will try and quell Rathalas' rebellion with politics. Dalinar knows it will come to the sword and seems to look forward to it. Chapter 37. Kaladin and Bridge 4, which has been augmented by members from other crews and Dalinar's soldiers, travel to the Shattered Plains. Kaladin wants them all to learn how to draw in Stormlight. Kaladin hopes it will protect them from death and injuries in battle. Kaladin agrees to help Elhokar retake Kholinar. They plan to leave in 20 days once Kaladin has had more time to train his squires. Rock can see all spren except for the one Renarin bonded with. Renarin feels like he can't be in Bridge 4 because he's from a different order. Rock comforts him and says he can be. Renarin fears becoming the man everyone assumes he was meant to be, basically an Ardent. Several Spren assemble on a nearby plateau. Rock makes an offering of spheres to them. He believes they're looking for people to bond to. Hopper draws in Stormlight and heals himself. He can stand again. Rock spots a pillar of smoke to the west of their training grounds. Their group goes to investigate and finds a cluster of caravan wagons that had been attacked by Voidbringers. Rock finds his family. They have finally come to the Shattered Plains. Rock introduces his family to Bridge 4. He and his wife begin to catch up. She says something is wrong with the peaks and will explain more later. Kaladin gives Rock and his family his rooms before the bridge crew carries their bridge back home one last time. Chapter 38. Dalinar draws Yasna and Navani into one of his earlier visions of the Last Desolation, the final defeat of the Voidbringers. Yasna tells Dalinar not to let anyone define him. Later, Navani and Dalinar find 9 honor blades, including the one the assassin in white used to kill Gavilar. Dalinar realizes that mankind didn't defeat the enemy for good, as the heralds claimed. They lied. That's on page 405. The Stormfather explains the beginning of the Desolations, how they are fighting Spren, reborn using the bodies of Parchment to become the Fused, which makes it impossible for men to win since the enemy can just be reborn over and over. Also on page 405. This leads to the Oath Pact. 10 people gave themselves up. As honor is sealed by the powers of honor and cultivation, your heralds sealed the Spren of the dead into the place you call damnation. The heralds went to honor, and he gave them this right, this oath. They thought it would end the war forever, but they were wrong. Honor was wrong. Honor let the power blind him to the truth, that while Spren and gods cannot break their oaths, men can and will. The 10 heralds were sealed upon damnation, trapping the Voidbringers there. However, if any one of the 10 agreed to bend this oath and let Voidbringers pass, it opened a flood. They could all return. That's on 406. Their act would begin a new desolation. This happened repeatedly as one of their ranks succumbed to their enemy's torture, creating a cycle of new desolations. Over time, the 9 realized one of them had never broken. Each of the others, at some point, had been the one to give in, to start the desolation, to escape the pain. They determined that perhaps they didn't all need to return. They decided to stay here, risking an eternal desolation, but hoping that the one they left in damnation would alone be enough to hold it all together. That's on 407. His name is Telenolad. He finally broke and joined the 9 who still live. Dalinar hopes to speak with him. Eventually, the vision fades. Chapter 39. Navani, Dalinar, and the Radiants, minus Malada, meet. Kaladin summarizes what they discovered in Dalinar's vision. Yasna says that they need to curb the Voidbringer assault. Kaladin wants to find another way so that the innocent, common man isn't destroyed. He feels as though they should only fight the dangerous Fused. Kaladin says he agreed to help Elhokar win back Kholinar and open its gate. Dalinar agrees to try and negotiate with the enemy once their homeland is secured. Dalinar can't reach anyone inside Kholinar. It's a dark spot. This coincides with reports of the failed Spanreeds within the city and reports of the enemy moving toward the capital. Yasna thinks they should take Kholinar back before they do anything else. Then, locate the heralds because of their pact. When they died, their souls traveled to damnation and trapped the spirits of the Voidbringers, preventing them from returning. The Stormfather said their pact was weakened, but did not say it was destroyed. We should see if one of them is willing to return to damnation. Perhaps they can still prevent the spirits of the enemy from being reborn. It's either that or we completely exterminate the Parchment so that the enemy has no hosts. That's on 415. While Yasna figures out how to find the heralds, Kaladin will train his men to scout from the skies since Spanreeds are no longer reliable. Yasna calls for a break. She finds Shallan sketching Kaladin. She asks her ward to be open with her. Shallan won't and suggests they terminate their wardship. Yasna refuses. When Shallan returns to her room after the meeting, she finds a note from Reyes in Vale's clothing. A letter which explains the truth about her deceased brother, Non-Helaron, acolyte of the Radiant Order of the Skybreakers. That's on 420. Chapter 40. The letter explains that 2 other groups knew of the possible return of the Voidbringers. The Sons of Honor, of which Amaram and Gavilar were members. Reyes writes that King Gavilar's efforts to rekindle the desolations are likely the true reason he was assassinated. A second group who knew the desolations might return are the Skybreakers. Led by the ancient herald Nalan Alin, often simply called Nail, the Skybreakers are the only order of Radiance that did not betray its oaths during the Recreants. They have maintained a continuous clandestine line from ancient days. Nail believed that men speaking the words of other orders would hasten the return of the Voidbringers. The heralds are no longer to be seen as allies to man. Those that are not completely insane have been broken. Nail has spent the last 2 decades, perhaps much longer, dealing with anyone close to bonding a Spren. That's on 421 to 22. Nail recruited Helarin. Helarin was killed while trying to kill Amaram to prove that he was worthy of knighthood. The Skybreakers did not know of Kaladin, or he would have been murdered by them. Shallan memorizes the letter before destroying it. Vale visits Vatha and his men. She realizes that Mraize is looking for a mole in the Radiance and wants to find a way to double-cross him. Gaz wants another job. Vale finds Ishna eavesdropping on their conversation while disguised as a washwoman. Shallan discovers that Ishna was trained as a spy. Shallan decides to have her teach Vatha and his men how to spy so they can support her and keep watch during missions. Vale really hopes to learn something useful during the lessons herself. Ishna reluctantly agrees to try. Chapter 41. Teft awakes from a night out in an alley of the breakaway. He shoos away the Spren who has bonded with him and finds a den so he can get high off Moss, forget his troubles and his shame, his past, turning his family in as heretics. Kaladin and Rock retrieve him from the den. They give him time to heal before he returns to work. Teft fears being without the Moss, without support, for too long. Chapter 42. Dalinar draws Yanagon, the ruler of the Azir, into his vision of the last desolation. After the battle, they watch the Herald of Kings proclaim that the gathered throng should announce their victory over the Voidbringers throughout the land. Dalinar introduces himself to Yanagon and tries to gain his trust. Eventually, a girl arrives in the vision, uninvited. The Stormfather wonders how this is possible. The girl tells Yanagon not to trust Dalinar. She and the Emperor vanish from the vision. The Stormfather explains that she was created to defy him and is tainted by the Night Watcher. The Stormfather is so distraught that Dalinar has to wait out the rest of the vision. Chapter 43. Graves tells Moash to cut the Bridge 4 patch off his coat. Moash does so reluctantly. He can't bring himself to get rid of the patch. Their camp is attacked by Voidbringers. All of Moash's company is killed, and he is taken captive after he hands over his shard blade, and the Voidbringers take the other shards the group bore. Chapter 44. Ishna gives Vale, Vatha, Red, and Gaz their first lesson in intelligence gathering. It's all about observation and simple memory tricks. Shallan struggles with juggling her personas and figuring out what she really wants and if it even matters. Shallan attends a meeting of the scribes where everyone talks about their group's work. Renarin explains that all of the fabrials they've seen around Urithiru are not fabrials, they're a fabrial. That's on page 455. In other words, a bunch of little fabrials that make one big fabrial. Donala, a scribe and one of Adolin's former love interests, mocks him. Shallan defends him. Yasna calls a recess. Yasna is not pleased by her ward's actions, but Renarin is grateful. Renarin and Shallan discuss how the Unmade once ran the fabrial and allowed them to find both the library room and the fabrial column. The group is surprised when Dalinar arrives at the meeting to support his son. Chapter 45. Moash is taken to Revelar and made a slave. He can pick a job or go hungry. He discovers that Bright Lord Paladar is a captive trying to regain his place. After displeasing him, Moash volunteers to pull wagons of supplies for the enemy's army. Chapter 46. Scar is used as a basis for comparison in Sigil's tests, where they compare regular man's abilities to that of a Windrunner. Scar, Dabid, and Elaine are the only Bridge 4 members who haven't managed to draw in Stormlight. Caledon arrives to take them to the Shattered Plains for more training along with several new hopefuls. No one outside of the Bridge 4 crew has learned to take Stormlight in yet, and he hopes a larger pool will help solve the problem. The groups continue practicing in the air and their formations. Scar comforts a frustrated Lyn. She draws in Stormlight. Scar is proud of himself for helping her, but feels like he may never fly. He offers Rock his services on the support team and begins glowing with Stormlight. Chapter 47. Yasna reads the ravings of the Herald of War. Ivory, her spren, confirms that it's really the words of a herald. Yasna determines that they have to locate him. The pair discuss how they find Yasna's ward troubling. Ivory finds Shallan's spren a cryptic, equally troubling because they are known for enjoying lies. Yasna hopes to find a way to get Shallan's impulses to stop ruling her. Ivory explains that all 10 orders have been reforged. Yasna says they must tell everyone what Wit told them. Ivory is against it because he feels as though it would lead to another recreance. It looks like Yasna is going to take the chance and see what happens. Chapter 48. Moash begins his work pulling a sledge of supplies to Kholinar for the Voidbringers. He admires their army's organization and feels as though the Almighty had sent the Voidbringers to wipe mankind out because man had proven it couldn't manage itself. There was only theft, fighting, and murder amongst its ranks. The only thing Moash doesn't understand about the Voidbringer army are the Parchment slaves who are treated poorly, far worse than the human slaves who are treated fairly well. Moash asks one of his overseers why the Parchment slaves are treated so badly. She explains that they harbored a false god on page 484. When one of their ranks collapses, Moash springs to the Parchment's defense and takes his place pulling the sledge. Surprisingly, Moash isn't punished and the Parchment slaves aren't whipped for the remainder of the march. 23 years ago, another Dalinar flashback. Dalinar tries to relax in a moss den. The guests are dismayed when the final wrestling match is cancelled. Dalinar tries to take the place of one of the fighters, but it doesn't work. The crowd disperses. Dalinar is frustrated. He just wants to fight again and learns from his men just how dangerous he is, why no one wants to fight him. Toh arrives. It looks like Evie will be delivering her baby early. Dalinar arrives after the baby is born. He's excited to be a dad. He and his wife name the baby Adolin. Gavilar arrives to tell his brother that he's failing in Rathalos. Tanalin is raising an army to oppose him. Gavilar sends Dalinar to fight on their borders, solve other problems with his sword. Gavilar is determined to unite Alethkar. Chapter 50. Kaladin and some of his squires fly Elhokar, Navani, Dalinar, Kadash, and a young Ardent over the Shattered Plains. Kaladin is practicing for his trip to Kholinar. Dalinar tries to determine the best way to get lumber and food to the people of Ur-Thuru. Dalinar sent Queen Fen into his vision of the last desolation at her request. Upon emerging from it, she agrees to visit Ur-Thuru. He agrees to send her a radiant. Dalinar convinces Kadash to tell him where to find the Herald's rooms at the monastery. He is about to leave when they get into a discussion what it would mean if Kadash and the world came to accept that the Almighty was dead. There would be no spiritual basis for Dalinar's rule. His conquest would no longer be a sign of the Almighty's favor. Kadash doesn't seem to feel as though Dalinar would be accepted. Kadash believes that Dalinar is sane. Dalinar locates the Herald's room and finds a hole made by a shardblade in the outer wall. He wonders who had taken him or harmed him. After inspecting the room, he finds a poisoned dart. Dalinar gives it to Navani along with some records from the Arden's safe for analysis. Dalinar tells Kaladin to fly to Thaylen City to get Queen Fen and open the Oath Gate. Kaladin agrees to go during the next storm. Chapter 51. Moash finds that the Parchment and his crew don't like him. He speaks with Sa about how the apocalypse wasn't supposed to be like this, involve farming. They arrive in a town, a suburb of Kholinar. The weak are sent to the city as refugees, an additional burden. The rest are told they're going to be building siege equipment and will run ladders at the front of the Voidbringer army when the siege begins. Moash can't help but laugh. Shallan finds a letter from Rey saying that they will allow Ishna to remain close to her, but not to trust her. He offers aid in covering up Ishna's murder should Shallan choose to do away with her. Shallan speaks to Elhokar and he agrees to take her on his trip to Kholinar to reclaim the city. She leaves with a formal request from Elhokar to Dalinar for help on his quest. Her actions are in accordance with what she decided at the meeting of scribes while talking to Renarin. She needs the time away from Ur-Thuru, time to figure out what the heck she actually wants. 18.5 years ago. A Dalinar flashback. Dalinar returns to camp, exhausted. He is still fighting his brother's wars on the borders of their lands. Evie surprises him with a visit. She brought the kids. Dalinar is upset with her for bringing them, but goes to meet them. He doesn't feel the excitement he felt meeting Adolin for the first time while meeting Renarin for the first time. He also hates Renarin's name. Dalinar shows Adolin his shardblade and promises to win one for him in war, but Adolin would rather win his own. Chapter 53. Yasna speaks with her colleagues, Ethid and Jochi, via Spanreed. Ethid explains that she has been tracking a man she's convinced is the Herald Naku, the judge. She also admits to having had a Radiant in Azir and Edge Dancer, Reshi, but the child ran off. She doesn't think the Heralds will be of any help and Yasna agrees. Yasna finds out that the Atlanta had been hit hard by recent events. Whole portions of the city lay in ruin. Amaram appears in the doorway to the library. He wants to talk to Yasna in private. She won't let him. He says he wants to bridge the chasm between their houses, have her steer Dalinar in the proper direction. Yasna won't. Amaram gets mad and brings up their past. It seems that Gavilar wanted them to marry. Yasna wanted nothing of it. They trade insults before he storms off. Yasna talks to her ward and finds out that she's supposed to go to Kholinar. Yasna isn't pleased and wishes to talk to Elhokar about it. She feels as though Shallan's attendance on the mission might be a little too extreme. Yasna wants Shallan to draw Renarin's and Kaladin's spren. Renarin opens a door behind one of the library's white tiles. It reveals a poorly cut gemstone Pattern believes is some sort of code. Renarin uses Stormlight to open the doors hidden behind the library's remaining white tiles. The library had decayed, but the ancient Radiants had obviously anticipated that. They'd found another way to pass on their knowledge. That's on page 528. Chapter 54. Moash and his Parchment crew help the Voidbringers build ladders. He demands to speak to one of the Voidbringers' leaders and is brought to Lady Leshwi, the Voidbringer he killed. Moash finds out that she doesn't want revenge on him and that he has survived because of his passion. He explains that he protected the Parchment slaves because the Voidbringers needed to be unified, and that he is not angry that his shards were taken or that his people are about to be destroyed. He believes that everyone has it coming. Lady Leshwi sets Moash free, but he chooses to return to his crew so that he can teach them the spear with ladder rods. They agree. Chapter 55. The Windrunners continue to train on the Shattered Plains. Elaine feels left out because he can't draw in Stormlight and is a Parchment. During a break, the men discuss whether or not Renarin fits in. He's scholarly and appears to be learning how to read, which is considered feminine. Rock comments on how many of them have come to him in the last few weeks and express that they don't feel as though they fit in with Bridge 4. They decide to feel alone together, on page 542. Kaladin notices that Elaine is frustrated and offers to listen as he explains his feelings. Elaine agrees to try and express himself. Chapter 56. Dalinar draws Navani and Yasna into a vision without a high storm. Yasna believes the vision takes place over 2,000 years after the last desolation. Yanagon is invited into the vision as well. He watches the Knights Radiant drive their weapons into the ground, abandon their armor. Yanagon admits that he's not that important, but is being trained to be. Yanagon and Dalinar watch the ordinary men fight over the abandoned shards. Yanagon is taken from the vision, but Dalinar remains even after it should have ended. He meets Odium, who claims he has always been with him and confirms the Almighty is dead. Chapter 57. Odium informs Dalinar that he's wrong about why the Radiants fell and that he's the first to bond the Stormfather in his current state, on page 550. Dalinar learns that Odium is one of 3 gods relevant to him, the others being cultivation and honor. Odium explains the consequences of releasing him, cultivation's death, the world's transformation, among other things. He seems certain that Dalinar will eventually release him. Odium explains that he also stands for passion. He is emotion incarnate, on page 551. And passion is the reason why the Radiants broke their oaths. That Dalinar has already met cultivation, and she took the memory. Something vital from him. Dalinar requests the Battle of Champions. Odium declines and shows Dalinar his true form, which overwhelms Dalinar. Odium leaves Dalinar and promises this won't be their last conversation. Lift, the girl who has come into many of Dalinar's visions with the Ezish Emperor, describes Odium as creepy. She says she and Gox will visit Urthuru before the vision fades. That's the end of part 2. Interludes. Kaza is a soulcaster on the first dreams. Her body is disintegrating, turning to smoke. Her goal is to help the ship's captain and crew reach the ancient island of Akina. Before they arrive on land, the men begin to feel sick, grow drowsy. Some turn back, others fall asleep in their dinghies, slip into the water. Kaza is the only one to make it ashore, where she finds the ship's cook, or at the very least, a hallucination. Apparently, the cook poisoned everyone in order to protect the island from discovery. Its riches, and potentially its secret, the one Kaza sought. How to avoid the impending death caused by her soulcaster. Before she slips into oblivion, Kaza turns the ground to smoke and lets it take her. Taravangian is having one of his better days and begins working with the diagram he created. It's both a group and an actual diagram. He reads about how he tried to have Dalinar killed by the assassin in white to avoid Dalinar's resistance to his rule. As Taravangian continues working, readers realize that his apparent stupidity, which is often credited to a stroke or senility, is all an act. At the very least, that's what he believes. Taravangian decides that he can no longer assassinate Dalinar. Instead, he must support his coalition, then force him to step down so that he can take Dalinar's place at the head of the monarchs. That's on 572. He plans on using Malada's Sprent to spy on Dalinar to help with his plot. Once he has gained power, Taravangian plans to make a deal with Odium to save those he feels matter. Venli, Demid, and 7 other Parchment stay out during the Everstorm to take a new form under Ulam's direction. One of them is crushed by a boulder. After angering Demid, Ulam tells Venli that he has become the temperamental fuse known as Hariel. He would not hesitate to hurt her. The others have also become the fuse, while she is bonded with a lesser Voidspren. Venli speaks with Hariel and discovers that Demon is truly dead. For a moment, she feels his loss deeply, but is forced to forget at Hariel's urging. She lives because Odium has a purpose for her. As the fused converse, Venli spots a Spren and instinctively knows that if the fused spot it, they will kill it. Venli hides it from them. Hariel tells her to prepare herself to go to Alethela. And that's the end of the first part of my summary. I'm going to continue in another video, probably within the next few days, with part 3, Defying Truth, Love Truth, chapter 58. If you like what you saw here today, please give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. How do you think I'm doing with my summary? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it exactly what you were looking for? I really want to know those things. And what's your favorite chapter up until this point? I want to know that too. If you could, please hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, so you know what's up, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye, guys.